The moon cast silver trails upon the restless sea, its glow shimmering over waves that whispered of forgotten legends. In the heart of the abyss, where light seldom kissed the waters, a lone figure drifted between shadows and bioluminescent coral. Serena of the abyss, last daughter of the merfolk, let the ocean cradle her as she listened to the song of dying tides. Her hair, woven with strands of pearl and midnight blue, floated in the water like a tapestry of lost dreams. Her eyes, deep as the twilight sea, carried the sorrow of a world unraveling. Scales of iridescent sapphire lined her body, once vibrant but now dimming with the curse that bled through her veins. She was alone, truly, utterly alone. Her people had withered, vanishing like mist under the sun. Their voices had grown quiet, their laughter now only an echo carried by the currents. The great halls of coral palaces stood empty, their beauty fading into the bones of the deep. The sea had turned against them, not in rage but in silence. The cycle of life had been broken. The prophecy spoke of a cure, a flicker of hope in the form of one not born of the ocean. A man, a rogue, a soul carved by the tempest. The last hope of the merfolk lay in Captain Riker Blackthorn, a name etched in the tongues of sailors, whispered with both reverence and dread. Serena knew of him, a pirate of storm and steel. His presence upon the waves was as inevitable as the tide. His ship, the Leviathan's wrath, prowled the seas like a beast untamed. Stories painted him as a ruthless hunter of treasure, a man who had danced with death more times than the stars could count. Yet beneath the legend lay a deeper truth, a curse of his own, one that bound him to the sea in ways no human could understand. Serena surfaced near the jagged cliffs of a hidden cove, her heart trembling like a fragile ember. The night was heavy with the scent of salt and smoke, for the pirate ship lay anchored in the bay. Lanterns flickered upon its deck, illuminating the restless figures of sailors who had long forgotten the touch of peace. And then there he was. Riker stood at the bow, his silhouette cut against the silver glow of the stars. He was a man carved by the sea itself, hair the color of aged mahogany, tousled by the wind. His eyes, sharp as cutlass steel, carried the weight of 1,000 storms. His coat, embroidered with gold and lined with wolf fur, draped over his shoulders like the mantle of a fallen king. Serena's breath caught as she watched him, unseen, a mere shadow against the tide. There was something in him, something raw, something untamed, that called to her in ways she could not name. Her voice, a melody spun from longing and the sorrow of vanishing worlds, rose above the waves. It wove through the night like a whispered prayer, curling around the wind until it reached the ears of the pirate. Riker stilled. His hands clenched the railing as the song laced itself through his mind, unraveling memories he had buried deep. He turned, his gaze searching the dark waters, his heartbeat the thunderous drum in his chest. And then he saw her. A vision of moonlit beauty, a creature born of myth and tide, her eyes like the endless ocean calling him home. The sea between them trembled, knowing that destiny had been set into motion. The sea was restless. Waves rose and fell as if whispering secrets to the night, their murmurs curling around the great ship anchored in the bay. Captain Riker Blackthorn stood at the bow, his grip firm on the worn wooden railing. His sharp gaze swept over the dark waters, searching for the source of the voice that had tangled itself into his very soul. The song had been unlike anything he had ever heard, soft as a whisper, yet strong as the tide. It was not merely sound, but something deeper, something that stirred the hidden parts of him, awakening memories long buried beneath the weight of blood and salt. And then she rose. The water parted like silk, unveiling Serena of the abyss in all her ethereal beauty. Moonlight kissed her damp skin, tracing the delicate shimmer of her sapphire scales. Her hair, woven with silver and deep ocean blue, framed a face sculpted by the hands of fate itself. And her eyes, those endless pools of twilight, held a sorrow that had no name, a longing that carried the weight of centuries. Riker's breath slowed, caught between wonder and wariness. "You are real," he muttered, his voice rough like the rolling tide. Serena tilted her head, her gaze never leaving his. "And you are the one I seek." Her voice was the hush of the waves against the shore, the soft lullaby of the ocean's embrace. Yet beneath its beauty, there was desperation, an unspoken plea woven between every syllable. Riker smirked, though his heart was unsteady. I do not grant wishes, Mermaid, nor do I fall to enchantments. Serena drifted closer, her delicate fingers brushing against the ship's hull, her touch sending ripples through the water. Not all enchantments are meant to trap, pirate. Some are meant to set free. A gust of wind swept through the sails, as if the sea itself had exhaled at her words. The ship groaned, ropes straining against unseen forces. A storm was rising, one not of rain or thunder, but of fate itself. Serena's gaze darkened with urgency. My people are fading. A curse has drained us of our future, our bloodline withering into nothingness. But there is a way to break it. Riker narrowed his eyes. And what has that to do with me? You carry the blood of the lost ones, she whispered. The ones who once walked between land and sea. You are the key, Riker Blackthorn. The only one who can save what remains of my kind. A sharp laugh escaped him, though there was no humor in it. You expect me to believe that I, pirate, murderer, thief, am the salvation of a dying race. Serena floated closer, her fingers rising from the water to graze the edge of his outstretched hand. The touch was light, fleeting, yet it burned through him like fire. You are more than what the world has made you, she said softly. And I am not asking for belief. I am asking for a chance. For a long moment, the night held its breath. Riker's heartbeat pounded in his ears, a war raging within him. He had faced death 1,000 times, had danced with the devil in the howling gales of the storm, but this was something far more dangerous. Before he could answer, the sea shuddered. The waters beneath them twisted, dark tendrils rising from the abyss like shadows given life. The ship lurched, men shouting in alarm as the ocean rebelled against its home nature. Serena gasped, her body recoiling as the cursed tide churned around her. A voice, low and wrathful, echoed through the night, carried by the wind. You dare defy me, child of the deep. Serena's face paled. She knows. Riker's muscles coiled as the truth settled over him. They were no longer alone. Something ancient had awakened, and it would not allow their destinies to entwine so easily. The storm had begun. The storm shattered the night. Winds howled through the sails of the Leviathan's wrath, and the sea rose in fury, dragging the ship into chaos. The sky split with jagged lightning, its reflection dancing in the wild waters below. Captain Riker Blackthorn braced himself against the force of nature's wrath, his fingers clenched around the ship's railing. His men scrambled, voices lost in the roar of the ocean. But Riker's gaze was fixed on her. Serena of the abyss fought against the rising waves, her sapphire tail flashing beneath the churning surface. The dark tendrils of cursed water slithered toward her, seeking to drag her into the abyss from which she had come. Shadows twisted, forming the shape of something monstrous, something watching. The voice that had haunted the night returned, deep as the trenches of the sea. You were never meant to escape me, lost daughter. Serena's breath caught. The presence was suffocating, filling the air like mist before a storm. She knew its name even before it spoke. Nerissa the Forsaken. Once a goddess, now a phantom of rage, bound to the sea's deepest prison. She had cursed the merfolk long ago, ensuring their kind would fade into legend. And now she had come to claim what remained. Riker did not know the full truth, but he knew this. Serena's eyes, filled with fear and defiance, had stirred something within him, something beyond reason or fate. The choice was made before he even realized it. Without hesitation, he leaped from the ship. The sea swallowed him whole, dragging him into the abyss. Cold wrapped around his body, its bite unforgiving. He should have drowned, should have sunk beneath the weight of the ocean. But then warmth. Serena's arms found him beneath the waves, her touch like the echo of a forgotten dream. Her hair, silver and blue, flowed around them, weightless as the tide. For a moment, the chaos around them faded. There was only the hush of the sea, the space between them narrowing. Foolish pirate, she whispered, her voice a melody of the deep. You should not have followed me. Riker smirked, his hand brushing against hers, rough skin against silken scales. Too late for regrets, little siren. The water stirred, currents entwining around them like invisible hands. The ocean itself seemed to hold its breath, sensing something ancient awaken between them. Serena's fingers traced the line of his jaw, her touch hesitant yet bold. If you mean to help me, you must understand what it will cost. Riker's gaze darkened, the depths of this past flickering in his storm-gray eyes. I have never feared the cost. Her lips parted as if to warn him, but the words never came. A pulse of magic surged through the water, wrapping around them, binding their fates as surely as the tide kissed the shore. Serena's body glowed softly, the luminescence of her mermaid blood mixing with the darkness of the storm. Riker felt the shift in the air, the pull of something greater than either of them. The bond had begun. Above, the sea goddess screamed, her rage splitting the heavens. The waves trembled in her fury, but it was too late. The pact had been sealed, not with ink or steel, but with something far deeper. Blood and water. Fate and choice. A pirate and a mermaid. The sea would never be the same again. The storm had passed, but the sea still carried the memory of its rage. Gentle waves lapped at the shore of a forgotten island, a place untouched by time. The sands gleamed like crushed pearl under the moonlight, and the air smelled of salt and unseen magic. The great ship, the Leviathan's wrath, lay wrecked upon the shallows, its sails torn, its mast broken like the bones of a wounded beast. And there, beneath the swaying palms, Riker Blackthorn stirred. The pirate captain woke to the distant whisper of the tide and the cool caress of night air. His body ached, a reminder of his reckless dive into the sea, but it was not pain that made him draw a slow, steady breath. It was something else. Someone else. He turned his head, and there she was, Serena of the Abyss, kneeling beside him, her ocean eyes watching, unreadable as the tide. The moon cast silver over her damp skin, her hair tumbling in waves of midnight blue and pearl. She was no mere creature of legend in that moment, no whisper of a dying race. She was simply Serena, and he was simply a man lost to the current of her gaze. "You breathed," she murmured, almost as if she had not expected it. Riker smirked, though his strength was not yet fully returned. Disappointed little siren. A flicker of something passed through her expression, but she did not answer. Instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing against the cut on his temple. The touch was barely there, like the kiss of a passing wave, yet it sent something deep into his bones, a quiet storm, something unseen yet felt. He let her touch linger, watching her as she studied him, as if trying to understand what kind of man would throw himself into the ocean for a creature he barely knew. "You should not have followed me," she said at last. Riker held her gaze, his own voice quieter now. "And yet I did." Serena's lips parted, but no words came. There were no words for this, the quiet moment in the aftermath of chaos, the weight of what had been sealed between them beneath the sea. She sat back, the glow of her iridescent scales dimming in the night. "We are bound now, pirate. You feel it, don't you?" He exhaled, eyes flickering toward the dark horizon. He did feel it. A tether, unseen yet unbreakable, had woven itself between them like threads of fate. He was no longer just Riker Blackthorn, rogue of the sea. He was something more, something unspoken. "A bond like this cannot be undone," Serena continued, her voice softer now. "Our souls have touched the currents of fate." A slow, knowing smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "And what does that mean for us, then?" Serena did not answer at first. Instead, she looked toward the waves, as if seeking answers from the sea itself. "It means that we cannot run from this," she whispered, "no matter how much we try." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and moonlight. Riker watched her, the warrior and the woman both, the fierce protector and the lost soul entwined in the same body. He reached for her hand, rough fingers brushing against her palm. She did not pull away. "We are not so different, you and I," he murmured, his voice touched with something rare, something like honesty. Serena's breath caught, just for a moment. And in the silence between them, the sea sang of things yet to come. The ocean was too still. Not a single wave kissed the shore, not a breeze stirred the palms. The air was thick with a quiet too heavy, too unnatural, like the world itself was holding its breath. Riker Blackthorn stood at the edge of the tide, boots sinking into the damp sand, his storm-gray eyes locked on the vast, endless horizon. He could feel it. A presence in the water, something older than time, something that did not forgive. Behind him, Serena of the Abyss lingered in the shallows, half submerged, her sapphire tail hidden beneath the moonlit waves. She was tense, her fingers curled against her palms. Her ocean eyes were unreadable, but he could see the flicker of fear beneath them. "She is coming," Serena whispered, her voice barely more than the breath of the tide. Riker did not ask who. He already knew. Nerissa the Forsaken. The sea goddess had felt the bond forged between them, had tasted the defiance in Serena's blood, and now she had come to reclaim what was hers. The water stirred. A slow ripple at first, then another. The sea darkened, ink spreading across its surface. From the abyss below, shadows writhed and twisted, taking shape, long skeletal fingers reaching toward the shore. Then the voice. "You dare defy me, child of the deep?" The words carried no sound, yet they echoed in the bones of the world. Riker clenched his fists, the weight of the goddess' presence pressing against his chest like a storm threatening to pull him under. Serena lifted her chin, though he saw the tremble in her fingers. "I will not bow to you." A low, hollow laugh rippled through the air, and the waves surged forward. From the depths, Nerissa emerged. She was not flesh nor spirit, but something caught between. Her form shifted like water, her body carved from liquid obsidian, her eyes voids filled with the drowning screams of centuries past. The broken crowns of the merfolk she had destroyed adorned her brow like trophies. "I gave you life," she hissed, her voice dripping with cold fury. "And now you waste it on a mortal?" Serena did not waver. "He is more than a mortal." The ocean trembled. Riker smirked despite the weight of doom pressing upon them. "That's the first time someone's called me that," he muttered. Serena's lips twitched, just barely, before she turned back to the goddess. "Your curse ends here." Nerissa's fury twisted the sky itself. "Then you will fade with it." The shadows struck first. Dark tendrils lashed toward Serena, but she was faster, diving into the sea, her tail flashing in the moonlight. Riker barely had time to move before the sand beneath him cracked, water rushing up to drag him under. He fought like he had in every storm, every battle, every moment that tried to claim him. He was no king, no hero of fate, but he was Riker Blackthorn, and he would not needle. With a roar, he slashed through the tendrils with his cutlass, the blade singing against the wind. Beside him, Serena rose from the waves, her hands glowing with the ancient magic of her kind. Their bond pulsed between them, unseen yet unbreakable. And as the wrath of a goddess descended upon them, they stood together, pirate and mermaid, bound by something the ocean itself could not swallow. The night screamed with the fury of a forgotten goddess. The sea, once a gentle cradle, had turned into a battlefield. The waves churned black as ink, the sky burned with lightning, and the air was thick with magic older than time itself. Nerissa the Forsaken loomed above the water, her form shifting like a living nightmare, her eyes empty voids that had swallowed empires whole. And beneath her wrath, two souls stood unbroken. Riker Blackthorn, rogue of the sea, bloody yet unbowed, held his cutlass firm in his grip. The salt and storm clung to the skin, his coat torn, his breath coming hard, but his fire had not dimmed. Beside him, Serena of the Abyss, the last daughter of the deep, shimmered like a star cast into the ocean's heart. Her scales caught the light of the storm, her hair a wild river of midnight, her hands glowing with the power of the merfolk's lost magic. The tide had bound them, and now it would test them. Nerissa's voice slithered through the air, a whisper laced with doom. "You cannot fight the sea, child." Serena lifted her chin, defiance in her ocean eyes. "I am the sea." And with that she struck. The water answered her call, rising like a serpent of sapphire and silver, coiling around her hands before she sent it forward, a wave of power crashing against the darkness. Nerissa shrieked, her form flickering, but she did not fall. She was ancient. She was fury. She was not done. The shadows surged toward Serena, twisting like the hands of the drowned, reaching to drag her beneath the abyss. But before they could touch her, steel flashed, Riker's blade cutting through the dark. He fought not as a hero, not as a king, but as a man who had always danced with death and never let it take him. "Stay behind me," he growled. Serena did not listen. Instead, she turned, and in one swift motion, she pressed her palm to his chest. The world pulsed, something unseen, something unspoken, and in that heartbeat, the ocean itself breathed between them. A gift, a curse, a choice made without words. Power flooded Riker's veins, cold as the deepest trench yet burning like the touch of a lover. His senses sharpened, his body lighter, stronger. He could hear the hum of the water, feel the pull of the tide in his bones. For the first time in his life, the sea did not fight him, it welcomed him. Serena's gaze held his, searching, waiting. And Riker, a man who had never believed in fate, suddenly understood that some things were inevitable. Their hands found each other in the chaos. Rough skin met silk. Kala's fingers tangled in ocean-born grace. For a moment, the battle did not exist. There was only the space between them, charged with something older than curses, stronger than fear. Serena's lips parted, her breath warm despite the storm. "You feel it," she whispered. Riker smirked, his thumb brushing against her wrist. "Aye." Then together, they turned to face the goddess. The ocean roared, the storm screamed, and destiny itself began to shift. The sea was alive with war. Dark waters churned, rising and falling like the breath of some great unseen beast. The sky above split with streaks of silver lightning, and the air trembled with the echo of a goddess fury. Nerissa the Forsaken loomed above the waves, her body shifting like a mirage, her voice thick with venom. "You defy the ocean itself," she hissed, her gaze fixed on Serena of the Abyss. "You betray your own kind for a mortal." Serena did not waver. "I betray nothing, I choose." The words hung in the storm's embrace, heavier than the howling wind. Riker Blackthorn, standing beside her, felt the weight of them. He had never been chosen before, not by the world, not by fate, not by love. But Serena had chosen him. And he, reckless and ruined as he was, had chosen her in return. Nerissa's rage cracked the air. The sea beneath them surged, lifting walls of water into the sky, waves stretching toward the heavens before crashing down with merciless force. The force of a god, the wrath of the deep. But Serena had given Riker something more than the sea's fury. She had given him its song. It pulsed in his veins, whispering secrets only the ocean knew. The tides no longer fought him. They followed his steps, bending to his will. He could feel the water, its strength, its hunger, its eternal pull. He had always been a man of the sea, but now he was something more. A robe no longer, a legend in the making. Serena's hand found his, their fingers locking together. The warmth of her touch burned through the storm's cold. Something electric passing between them, a silent promise. And then they moved. Serena raised her arms, and the waves obeyed. The ocean twisted, currents rising to form a great serpent of water, its body coiling in the sky before striking toward Nerissa's dark form. At the same moment, Riker leaped from the ship's wreckage, his blade glinting beneath the storm's light. He had fought many battles, against kings, against empires, against fate itself. But never had he fought with the ocean at his back. The clash was chaos. Shadow met steel, water met fire, the past and future colliding in the heart of the tempest. Nerissa lashed out with a force that could shatter mountains, her rage twisting the sea into a storm of nightmares. But Riker and Serena were no longer merely pirate and mermaid. They were something greater, something unstoppable. Their bond was not born of duty, not of prophecy. It was born of choice. And in that choice, they found their strength. Nerissa screamed, her form cracking like shattered glass. The power of the ocean surged against her, no longer hers to command. The waves turned against their former queen, dragging her into the abyss she had once ruled. For the first time in centuries, the goddess of the deep fell. The storm broke. The clouds parted, revealing a sky painted in dawn's first light. The sea, once wild with fury, softened into ripples, its rage finally at rest. And on the water's surface, Riker and Serena stood together, breathless, alive, bound. The battle was over. But the story, their story, had only just begun. The sea had finally stilled. Golden light stretched across the waves as dawn kissed the world awake. The storm was gone, leaving only the scent of salt and the distant cry of gulls. The wreckage of the Leviathan's wrath lay scattered along the shore of the forgotten island, its proud sails now torn memories. But none of that mattered, for Riker Blackthorn still stood, and beside him, Serena of the Abyss breathed, alive and unbroken. She lingered at the water's edge, the tide lapping gently at her sapphire tail, her silvered blue hair catching the light like spun moonlight. Her ocean eyes, once haunted by fate, now held something new, something fragile, something free. Riker watched her, arms crossed, the ghost of a smirk on his lips. "You look different, little siren." Serena glanced at him, the barest flicker of amusement touching her lips. "Do I?" He murmured, like someone who just took down a god. Her laughter was soft, like the whisper of the tide. But when she turned fully toward him, the weight of the world settled between them. The battle was won. The goddess was gone. But what now? Serena hesitated, fingers trailing through the water. "The ocean," she whispered. "It feels different." Riker stepped closer, the warmth of his presence chasing away the chill of the morning air. "How so?" Her gaze met his, something unreadable in its depths. Lighter, a pause. "And yet, I am still the last mermaid, the last daughter of a dying race." The burden of that truth hung between them, an unspoken thing. Riker exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Serena frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He took another step, closing the space between them. His rough, callous fingers brushed against hers, the touch brief yet charged. "You said it yourself, didn't you?" His voice dropped lower, something softer beneath the usual smirk. "The sea is different now." Serena swallowed. The tide licked at her skin, carrying his words through her veins like the rhythm of the ocean itself. She felt it, this shift between them, this invisible current pulling her toward him. His hand came to rest against her cheek, rough but careful, as if she were something fragile, though they both knew she was anything but. "You were never meant to fade, little siren." Her breath hitched. "And you were never meant to drown." Riker chuckled, a deep, quiet sound. "And yet you keep pulling me under." The space between them narrowed, and for a moment, the world felt like it had paused, as if the sea itself was waiting. Serena's fingers curled around his wrist, anchoring herself. Her voice was barely a whisper. "If I stay, if I choose this path, it cannot be undone." Riker's thumb traced the line of her jaw, the storm gray of his eyes locked on hers. "Then let's make sure it's the right one." And in that breath, that heartbeat, that endless tide, she chose. Serena leaned into him, the space between them vanishing like foam on the waves, and when their lips met, the sea rose in celebration, wrapping around them like a promise whispered in the language of the tides. She was no longer the last, for where the sea met the shore, something new was always born.